The girl had not slept indoors in 11 days, and still the first thing she did when she saw the old man lose his footing on the icy steps outside the post office on Barrington Street was reach out both hands and say, "Careful, sir, I've got you." No one else on the sidewalk stopped. No one turned. In a city like Halifax, on a morning as cold as this one, people walked with their chins buried in their scarves and their eyes fixed 2 steps ahead, and a small girl in an oversized parka steadying a stranger's elbow was the kind of moment that passed without a witness. But that girl, Sadie Faulkner, 9 years old, and light enough that the wind off the harbor pushed her half a step sideways every time it gusted, did not know that the man whose arm she was holding had once argued a case before the Supreme Court of Canada that changed the way this country understood corporate accountability. She did not know that his name had appeared in the National Post and the Globe and Mail more times than he could remember, or that the law firm he had built over 40 years still bore his name on the brass plaque beside the door of its Toronto office. She only knew that his right foot had slipped on the second step, that his left hand had grabbed the railing a moment too late, and that the stack of parcels he had been carrying was already falling. She caught 2 of them before they hit the ground. The third landed softly in a snowbank beside the steps, and she picked it up and brushed the snow off the brown paper with her sleeve. That single moment, ordinary and unremarkable and noticed by no one, would set in motion a story that neither of them could have imagined standing there on those icy steps in the pale December light. Before we begin, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from today, and if stories like this stay with you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Halifax in early December had a way of making itself felt before you even opened your eyes in the morning. The cold came off the Atlantic and settled into the old stone and brick of the waterfront buildings, into the iron railings along the harbor walk, into the bones of the fishing boats rocking at their moorings in the gray chop. The sky was low and white, the kind of sky that could not decide whether it wanted to snow or simply hang there looking heavy. And the wind found its way through every gap, in every coat, and every loose window frame in the old South End row houses, where the rent was still cheap enough for people who worked with their hands. Sadie Faulkner knew that cold. She knew it the way a person knows a room they have lived in for a long time, every corner of it, every draft. She was standing across the street from the post office that morning with her back pressed against the brick wall of a closed shoe repair shop. Her hands pulled inside the sleeves of a parka that had belonged to her older cousin and still smelled faintly of cigarettes and cheap laundry soap. Her boots were held together at the sole with a strip of silver duct tape that she replaced every 2 days when it peeled away from the damp. Inside her backpack, which she carried everywhere, because leaving it anywhere meant losing it, were a change of socks, a toothbrush with frayed bristles, a composition notebook with a cracked spine, a blue ballpoint pen that still had ink, and a small wooden horse her father had carved for her from a piece of driftwood the summer before he died. She carried no food. She had eaten half a bread roll the previous evening that a woman outside Tim Hortons had given her without being asked, and before that, a package of saltine crackers she had found unopened on a bench at the bus terminal. Hunger had become a thing she managed the way a person manages a dull headache, not by fixing it, but by learning to think around it. She had been on her own for 11 days. Her mother, who had held 2 jobs, and sometimes 3 for as long as Sadie could remember, had been arrested outside a convenience store on Gottingen Street for something Sadie did not fully understand. And the woman from Community Services who had come to the apartment the next morning had spoken in a calm, careful voice about temporary placement and emergency foster care and a process that would take a few days. Sadie had nodded politely and packed her backpack and left through the back door of the building while the woman was on the phone in the kitchen. She had heard stories from the older kids at school about emergency placements, about houses where you shared a room with 4 other children and the doors did not always lock, and the people were sometimes kind and sometimes not. And she had decided, in the quiet way she decided most things, that the street was a trouble she understood and the other was a trouble she did not. She was not waiting for anything in particular that morning outside the shoe repair shop. She was watching the post office because the post office had a heated vestibule where you could stand for 10 or 15 minutes before someone told you to move along. And she was timing her next visit, spacing them out so the same clerk would not recognize her twice in one day. She had learned, in 11 days, how to be invisible, how to move through the city in the gaps between people's attention, how to sit in a library until closing without drawing a question, how to sleep in the stairwell of a parking garage on Spring Garden Road where the security guard changed shifts at midnight and the new one did not check the upper floors. The man who came down the steps of the post office that morning moved the way tall men move when they have grown older than their height was designed for, carefully, with a slight lean forward as if negotiating a truce with gravity. He was 64 years old, though he looked older in the way that grief sometimes ages a face faster than time. He had a full head of silver-white hair cut short and neat, and he wore a long navy overcoat made of wool so fine it did not wrinkle, and a pair of leather gloves the color of chestnuts. Under one arm he carried a wooden cane with a plain silver handle, and in both hands he held 3 parcels wrapped in brown paper, stacked one on top of the other, the top one beginning to slide. His name was Leonard Bryce, and he had retired from the law 18 months earlier, after a career that had taken him from a one-room office above a bakery in Charlottetown to the senior partnership of one of the largest corporate law firms in the country. He had moved to Halifax 6 months ago, to a house on the Northwest Arm that his wife had loved, and that he had kept after she died, because the house still held the shape of her in its rooms and its garden. And the particular way the light came through the kitchen window in the afternoon, and he was not ready to let go of that shape, not yet. Not while the missing of her was still the first thing he felt each morning before he opened his eyes. He had come to the post office to mail 3 parcels to his daughter in Vancouver, and he had refused the clerk's offer to call him a cab, because Leonard Bryce had always been a man who believed that the legs he had been given were meant to be used, and because the walk from the post office to the place where his car was parked gave him 12 minutes of cold Atlantic air, and the sound of the harbor, and the feeling, however brief, that the city was still a place where ordinary things happened to ordinary people, and that he was one of them. His right foot found the patch of ice on the second step. His body knew before his mind did. The parcels shifted, the top one tipped, and his left hand grabbed for the railing but missed it by an inch, and for a half-second he was falling. That particular slow-motion sensation that old bones recognize as a warning, and then a pair of small, cold hands were on his forearm, pressing firmly, and a voice beside him said, "Careful, sir, I've got you." He did not fall. He steadied himself, found the railing, and looked down. The girl was small. That was the first thing. Small in the way that children are small when they have not been eating enough for long enough that the body begins to make itself lighter, to conserve what little it has. Her face was pale, with a scatter of freckles across the bridge of her nose, and her eyes were a dark gray-green, the color of the harbor water in November. Her hair, reddish-brown and uncombed, stuck out from under a knitted hat that had been washed so many times it had lost whatever color it had started with. She was holding 2 of his parcels against her chest with both arms, and the third, the one that had fallen, she had already retrieved from the snowbank and was brushing clean with the cuff of her sleeve. "Thank you," Leonard said. His voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years choosing his words carefully before he said them. He looked at the parcels in her arms, then at the duct tape on her boots, then at her face. He did not say anything about what he saw. "I should have watched my step." "The ice is bad on this side," Sadie said. "It's better if you go down by the railing and step wide at the bottom. There's a dry patch near the lamppost." She sees it the way a person gives directions to a place they know well without thinking, because she had walked these steps many times in the past 11 days and had learned where the ice formed and where it did not. Leonard noticed this. He noticed it the way a man who had spent a career reading people noticed small things, not with suspicion, but with attention. "You know these steps," he said. "Yes, sir." He reached for the parcels. Sadie handed him one, but kept the other 2, shifting them slightly so she could carry them more easily. "I can walk with you," she said, "to wherever you're going, so you don't have to juggle them on the ice." It was not a question. It was an offer, made plainly, without expectation, the way her father had taught her to offer help before he got sick, before the cancer ate through him in 7 months and left her mother alone with a girl and a grief so large it filled every room in their small apartment like smoke. Her father had been a carpenter. He had built things. He had fixed things. And he had told Sadie, in the plain, unhurried way he said everything, that the world had 2 kinds of people in it, the kind who walked past a person who needed help and the kind who stopped, and that she should always, always be the kind who stopped. Leonard looked at the girl for a long moment. He had the stillness of a man who had learned, through decades of courtrooms and conference rooms and difficult conversations across wide mahogany tables, to wait before speaking, to let the silence do the work that words sometimes could not. "I'm parked about 8 blocks from here," he said. "Near the Arm. That's a fair walk in this cold." "I don't mind the cold, sir," Sadie said. And this was true in the way that many things Sadie said were true, not because the cold did not bother her, but because she had stopped expecting it not to. "All right then," Leonard said. He tapped his cane once on the dry patch of pavement near the lamppost, exactly where she had told him to step. "Let's walk." They walked. The wind came off the water in long, slow pushes that rattled the awnings of the shops, along Barrington, and sent a paper coffee cup skittering across the sidewalk ahead of them. They passed a used bookshop with a cat sleeping in the window. They passed a barber shop with its door propped open despite the cold, and the sound of a hockey game on a radio drifted out along with the warm smell of aftershave. They passed a woman in a green coat, walking a greyhound that was wearing a small tartan sweater, and Sadie watched the dog with an expression that was not quite longing but was close to it. After 3 blocks, Leonard spoke. "What is your name?" "Sacy, sir." "Sadie Faulkner." "Sadie." He said the name the way a man reads an inscription on something old, slowly, giving it its proper weight. "A steady name." "My dad picked it," Sadie said. Her voice did not waver, but Leonard, who had spent a lifetime listening to what people said in the spaces between their words, heard the small tightening in it, the way a rope tightens before it holds. "He chose well," Leonard said. They walked another block in silence. Leonard did not ask about the father. He did not ask why a 9-year-old girl was standing alone outside a post office on a Tuesday morning when school was in session, or why her boots were taped together, or why she carried her backpack the way a soldier carries a kit bag, as if it contained everything she owned. He had learned, in a long life of sitting across from people in crisis, that questions asked too soon became walls, and that the things a person truly needed to say would come in their own time if you gave them room. He let the silence sit. He let the sound of their footsteps and the tap of his cane on the cold sidewalk fill the space between them, and he watched, from the corner of his eye, the way the girl held the parcels, carefully, protectively, as if she had been asked to guard something that mattered. "Sadie," he said after another block, "do you have somewhere warm to go today?" The question was quiet. It had no edge to it, no urgency, no pity. It was the kind of question a person asks when they already suspect the answer, but want to give the other person the dignity of choosing how to say it. Sadie looked straight ahead. She watched a seagull lift off the roof of a fish market and bank hard against the wind, and she said, "Sort of, sir. The library's open until 5. Leonard nodded once. He did not stop walking. He did not change the rhythm of his cane. But something moved behind his eyes, a small, quiet calculation of the kind he had made 1,000 times before, in offices and hospitals and courtrooms. The kind of calculation that was not about numbers, but about what a situation required, and what he was able to do about it. They turned onto a quieter street that ran along the water. The houses here were larger, set back from the road behind stone walls and bare hedgerows. The harbor opened up to their left, gray and restless, and a ferry was making its way across to Dartmouth, its lights pale in the midday gloom. Ahead, in a small gravel pull-off beside a stone wall, a dark green car was waiting. It was old. A Volvo estate from the 90s, the kind of car that had been good once and had been maintained carefully enough to remain good, and it did not look like the car of a man who could afford the houses on this street. That was deliberate. Leonard Bryce had never seen the point of a car that told people what was in his bank account. Sadie's steps slowed. She had not expected a car. She had not expected someone to be waiting. A woman was standing beside the driver's door, short, with steel-gray hair under a wool cap and a thick cable-knit sweater under an open coat. She had her arms crossed against the cold and was watching the street with the patient, unhurried attention of a person who had been waiting for someone for a long did not mind. "That is Constance," Leonard said, noticing the girl's hesitation. "She has worked with me for 23 years. She looks after the house, and when I let her, looks after me. She's a good person. You'll see." Constance saw them coming from half a block away. She straightened, uncrossed her arms, but she did not move toward them. She had learned, over 23 years, that Leonard arrived at his own pace and did not appreciate being rushed. When she saw the girl walking beside him, carrying 2 brown paper parcels against her chest, her expression did not change in any obvious way, but her eyes moved briefly to Leonard's face and back, and something in the set of her mouth softened. "Constance," Leonard said as they reached the car, "this is Sadie Faulkner. She kept me from falling on the post office steps and then carried my parcels 8 blocks in the cold. I believe that qualifies her as the most helpful person I've met this month." Constance turned to Sadie. She did not look her up and down. She did not glance at the duct-taped boots or the oversized parka. She simply said, with a warmth that came from somewhere deep and practiced, "Miss Faulkner, that's very kind of you. Thank you." No one had ever called Sadie Miss Faulkner. Teachers called her Sadie. Her mother called her Sadie, or sometimes Sweetheart when she was not too tired. The older kids at school called her things she tried to forget. Miss Faulkner was a name that belonged to someone who mattered, someone worth addressing with care, and it settled into her chest with a weight she did not expect. "You're welcome, ma'am," Sadie said, because it was the truest thing she could think to say. Constance took the parcels gently from Sadie's arms and placed them on the back seat of the Volvo. Sadie watched them go and felt, for a half-second, a reluctance she did not entirely understand. The parcels had been her purpose, her reason for walking, the small job she had been given, and letting them go felt like the end of something. Leonard reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat. Sadie saw the motion and felt her stomach tighten. She knew what came next. She had imagined it during the walk, had almost allowed herself to hope for it, and now, standing in the cold beside the green car, she found that she did not want it. "I didn't do it for money, sir," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I did it because you were going to fall." Leonard's hand stopped inside his coat. He looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was the kind of expression that comes just before one, the way the sky lightens a shade before the sun actually breaks the horizon. He withdrew his hand. It held a small white card, printed on heavy paper. He held it out between two gloved fingers. "This has my name and a phone number on it," he said. "The number goes to Constance, who you've just met. If you ever need help, Sadie, with anything at all, you call that number. You don't have to explain. You just say, 'This is Sadie. I met Mr. Bryce outside the post office.' Constance will know what to do." Sadie took the card. Her fingers were red and stiff, and the paper felt smooth and heavy between them, the kind of paper that did not bend easily. She looked down at it. Printed in plain black letters, Leonard J. Bryce. Below it a phone number, nothing else. No title, no firm name, no address. She did not know, holding that card on a cold December morning, beside a harbor she had looked at every day of her life, that the name Leonard J. Bryce had appeared on the mastheads of legal journals and in the business sections of national newspapers for the better part of 35 years. She did not know that the firm he had founded was one of the most respected in the country, with offices in Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. She did not know that he had once been named to the Order of Canada and had declined the ceremony because he did not care for the attention. She did not know that the man standing in front of her in the navy wool overcoat could have purchased every buildings on Barrington Street with a fraction of what sat in a single investment account. She only knew that the old man had given her a card with a name and a number and had told her she could call. "Thank you, sir," Sadie said. She slid the card into the inside pocket of her parka, the pocket closest to her chest, the same pocket where she kept the wooden horse her father had carved. Leonard and Constance exchanged a look over the girl's head. It lasted less than a second. It was a look that had passed between them many times before, in many different situations, over 23 years, and it required no words. Constance gave the smallest nod, the kind a person gives when they have understood the question before it has been asked. She opened the rear door of the Volvo, and the warm air from inside spilled out onto the gravel, carrying with it the faint smell of wool and old leather and something else. Something that Sadie recognized after a moment as the smell of a clean, warm house. "Sadie," Leonard said, "I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to feel completely free to say no." He paused. He did not lower his voice or soften it into the careful, patronizing tone adults sometimes used with children when they were trying to be gentle. He spoke to her the way he would have spoken to anyone. "I'm going to have lunch in about half an hour at a small place near the public gardens. The woman who runs it is a friend of mine. The food is plain and very good. I'd be glad of the company if you'd like to join me." He paused again. "You are not obligated. Constance can drive you anywhere you need to go. No lunch required. I only wanted to ask." Sadie stood very still beside the green car. The wind off the harbor was pushing at the back of her neck, and her stomach, which had been quiet for hours by sheer force of habit, gave a small, treacherous turn at the word lunch. She thought about the wooden horse in her pocket. She thought about her father, who had taught her to be careful with strangers, and who had also told her, once sitting on the back steps of their apartment on a summer evening, that some strangers were just neighbors you hadn't met yet, and that you could usually tell the difference if you paid attention. She looked at Leonard's face. She looked at the patient gray eyes, the silver hair, the gloved hands folded calmly over the handle of the cane. She looked at Constance, who had stepped back a respectful distance and was pretending to check something on the car's side mirror. "Yes, sir," Sadie said. "I'd like that. Thank you." Leonard nodded once, as if a small, important agreement had been reached, and gestured toward the open door. Sadie hesitated at the threshold the way a person hesitates at the edge of deep water, and then she climbed in. The seat was wide and worn and warm. There was a soft hum from the heater running under the dash, and the leather smelled like something old and cared for. She sat very still with her backpack on her lap and tried not to touch anything she did not need to touch. Leonard settled in beside her with the slow, deliberate movements of a man whose knees had stopped cooperating several years ago. Constance closed the door, walked around to the front, and pulled the car out of the gravel lot onto the quiet road along the arm. Sadie watched Halifax pass by the window in a way it never had before. From inside a warm car, the city looked smaller. The icy sidewalks could not bite at her taped-together boots. The wind could not find her. "Constance," Leonard said, "the place on Spring Garden, please. Let Hattie know we'll be two for lunch, and that one of us is a young woman who has done me a considerable favor this morning." "Yes, sir," Constance said. She glanced once into the rearview mirror, met Sadie's eyes, and gave her a small, reassuring nod that did not require any words. The restaurant was on a side street just off Spring Garden Road, tucked between an old record shop and a place that repaired clocks. Its name, painted in quiet gold letters on the glass, was Hattie's. It was small and warm and smelled of bread. That was the first thing Sadie noticed when Constance held the door open for her, and the bell above it gave a soft, friendly sound. The smell of bread. The kind that has been baking slowly for hours. The kind that reaches into you and loosens something you did not know you were holding tight. There were 10 tables, maybe 12, each covered with a plain white cloth. The walls were a soft green, the color of new leaves, and there were framed photographs of the harbor in different seasons and a large chalkboard with the day's menu written in careful slanting letters. A woman came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She was in her late 50s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with gray pulled back in a loose braid, and when she saw Leonard, she crossed the room with the easy warmth of a person greeting someone she had known for years. "Leonard," she said, taking both his hands. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Leonard." "I know, Hattie. I've been poor company lately. Forgive me." "The weather," Hattie said, and it was unclear whether she was blaming the weather or forgiving him because of it. Then she turned and looked down at Sadie, who was standing half a step behind Leonard with her backpack held in front of her like a shield. Hattie's face did not change in any sudden or dramatic way. She did not gasp or fuss or do any of the things that adults sometimes did when they saw a child who looked the way Sadie looked. She simply bent her knees, slowly, until her face was level with Sadie's, and she said with the same directness she had used with Leonard, "And you must be the young woman who kept this man on his feet. I'm Hattie. This is my place. You're very welcome here." "Thank you, ma'am," Sadie said. "I'm Sadie, Sadie." Hattie repeated it slowly, the way a person reads a name on a christening gift. "That's a lovely name. Are you hungry, Sadie?" She had been taught not to admit hunger to strangers, because hunger said out loud was a thing that made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people made unpredictable decisions. But Hattie's face was patient, and Leonard was standing quietly behind her, and the smell of bread was so close and so warm that she could feel it in the back of her throat like a promise. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I think I am." "Good," Hattie said, and stood. "Then we've done the important part." She led them to a table near the front window, where the thin December light came through the glass and made small patterns on the white cloth. She pulled out a chair for Sadie with the same quiet formality she would have shown the premier. Sadie sat. The chair was solid and warm. Hattie disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with a basket of bread, warm and dark, with a small dish of butter, and another of honey. Leonard settled himself across from Sadie with a quiet sigh. He set his cane against the wall where it would not fall. He took slabs and folded them neatly. Then he reached for the bread, tore a piece slowly, and pushed the basket toward the center of the table where Sadie could reach it. "Eat as much as you like," he said. "Hattie will keep bringing it. That is the kind of person she is." Sadie reached for a piece of bread. Her hand trembled, just slightly, the way a hand trembles when the body has been waiting too long for something, and finally allows itself to believe the thing is real. She tore the bread carefully. She spread a thin layer of butter on it. She put it in her mouth. The bread tasted the way her father's kitchen had smelled on Saturday mornings when he was still alive, and the world was still a place that made sense. She chewed slowly. She did not cry. She had decided somewhere in the car that she was not going to cry in front of Leonard Bryce, but her eyes stung and she kept them down on the white tablecloth, and she ate. Leonard did not watch her eat. That was the kindness Sadie noticed first, and the one she would remember, long after she had forgotten the name of the street or the color of the walls. He did not lean forward. He did not study her face. He did not say any of the soft, pitying things adults sometimes said when they saw a hungry child eating in front of them. He simply tore his own piece of bread, buttered it, and turned his face slightly toward the window so that Sadie could eat in peace. He talked after a while about small things, the harbor, the ferry schedule, a book he had been reading about the history of the Citadel, the way the crows in Point Pleasant Park had learned to open the lids of the garbage bins, which he considered a sign of intelligence that most people underestimated. He spoke the way a person speaks to fill a room with a gentle, undemanding sound, the way you leave the radio on for someone who is recovering from something difficult. Hattie brought soup, thick and golden, with chunks of potato and leek. She brought a plate of roasted chicken with root vegetables and a warm bread roll on the side. She brought a glass of milk for Sadie and a cup of black coffee for Leonard and refilled the bread basket without being asked. She did not ask Sadie any questions. She did not ask Leonard any questions either. She moved through the small, warm room like a person who had decided long ago that the people at her tables were her people and that her job was to feed them and let them be. Halfway through the chicken, Sadie set her fork down. She had eaten more in the last 20 minutes than she had eaten in the last 4 days, and her stomach, which had grown accustomed to emptiness, was protesting the sudden kindness in small, uncertain ways. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at her plate. She looked at Leonard. "Sir," she said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," Leonard said. "Why are you doing this?" Leonard did not answer right away. He set his own fork down. He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, and returned the cup to its saucer with the careful precision of a man who had spent a long life handling things that could break. He looked at Sadie across the white tablecloth, and the thin winter light through the window caught the silver of his hair and held it for a moment. "That's a fair question," he said, "and it deserves a straight answer." He paused. "When I was about your age, Sadie, I lived in a small town on Prince Edward Island that most people have never heard of. My father had left when I was 4, and I don't remember much about him except the sound of the door closing. My mother worked at a fish plant. She stood on her feet for 10 hours a day in rubber boots in a building that was cold in winter and smelled terrible in summer. And she came home at night with her hands cracked and raw, and she made me supper and helped me with my homework, and she never once lets me see her cry. Though I know now that she must have. We did not have much. There were weeks, more than I like to count, when the cupboard had nothing in it but oatmeal and powdered milk. And there were mornings when my mother packed my school lunch with bread and margarine and nothing else and told me it was a sandwich." He stopped. He took another sip of coffee. Sadie did not move. "One winter afternoon," he continued, "I was walking home from school and I passed a woman on the road who had dropped a bag of groceries in the snow. The bag had split. Apples and cans and a carton of eggs were scattered across the shoulder of the road, and she was trying to pick them up, but she had a bad hip and she could not bend far enough. I was 9 years old. I was hungry. Some of the apples were bruised, and she would not have missed one if I had slipped it into my coat pocket. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have blamed me." He looked at Sadie very steadily. "I did not do that," Leonard said. "I picked up every apple. I carried her groceries to her door. And when we got there, she invited me inside and gave me a bowl of fish chowder that I can still taste if I sit quietly and close my eyes." He paused. "Her name was Mrs. Chicken. That was her real name, Edith Chicken. I know it sounds like something from a children's book, but that was her name. And she fed me supper 3 nights a week for the next 5 years. She is the reason I went to university. She is in most of the ways that matter, the reason I am sitting here today." Sadie was very still. "You did for me this morning," Leonard said quietly, "what I did for her a long time ago. So I am doing for you what she did for me. That's all it is." Sadie looked down at the white tablecloth for a long time. The story had settled into a place inside her that did not yet have words for what it was feeling. She thought about apples in the snow. On a road in Prince Edward Island 60 years ago, she thought about a small boy choosing to give back what no one would have known he had taken. She thought about Mrs. Chicken, whoever she had been, who had opened her door to a hungry child and changed the entire course of a life she could not possibly have foreseen. She thought about her own father, who had sat on the back steps of their apartment one evening and said to her, in his plain, unhurried voice, "You just be good to people, Sad. That's all there is. You be good to people and the rest of it sorts itself out." "Sir," she said, and her voice was very small, "I don't know how to say thank you for this." "You don't have to," Leonard said. "You already said it on the steps." They finished their meals slowly. Hattie brought a small bowl of vanilla ice cream for Sadie without being asked, and Leonard did not protest. The light through the window dimmed from pale white to the soft gray that comes just before the early December dark, and a few other tables in the restaurant filled quietly with people in coats and scarves who nodded to Hattie as they came in. Sadie ate the ice cream one careful spoonful at a time, making it last the way she had learned to make small good things last, because small good things did not come often, and she wanted to remember every part of each one. When the meal was over, Leonard settled the bill with Hattie in a way that Sadie did not see, because Leonard had spent a lifetime handling money in a way that never made anyone feel like a charity case. Hattie walked them to the door. She bent down to Sadie's level and said, "You come back anytime, Sadie, with Leonard or without. You tell whoever's here that Hattie is expecting you, and there will always be a plate." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." Outside, the air had grown colder and the streetlights were beginning to come on, casting small circles of orange on the icy sidewalk. Constance was waiting beside the Volvo with the same calm patience she had shown that morning, and she opened the rear door without a word. Leonard paused on the sidewalk. He turned to Sadie. "I'm going to ask you one more thing, Sadie, and you are completely free to say no." He looked at her carefully. "Constance and I are driving home now. The house I live in is on the northwest arm. It's a large house, too large, frankly, for one old man and one very patient woman who puts up with him. There is a small room on the ground floor with a bed that has clean sheets on it, and a window that looks out onto the garden and a bathroom of its own, and a door that locks from the inside." He paused. He let the words sit. "You would not be a guest who has to earn her keep. You would be a young person under my roof, and you would be safe there. Constance is in the cottage at the back of the property. She has raised 4 children of her own, and she is kinder than I am, which I suspect you have already noticed." He paused again. "You may say no. Constance will drive you anywhere you ask her to drive you. I will not be hurt, and I will not be offended. But I am 64 years old, and I have learned that some offers, when they come, ought to be made plainly. So I am making it plainly." Sadie stood on the sidewalk outside Hattie's in her cousin's parka in her duct-taped boots, and she looked up at the tall man in the navy overcoat, and she thought about the card in her pocket, and the wooden horse in the same pocket, and the bed with clean sheets, and the door that locked from the inside. She thought about her mother in a place she was not allowed to visit, and the woman from community services who had spoken in a careful voice about temporary placement. She thought about the stairwell in the parking garage on Spring Garden Road, and the long, cold nights and the small, careful hope she had been carrying in her chest like a bird she was afraid to hold too tightly. "Yes, sir," she said. "Thank you, sir. I'd like that." The drive took 20 minutes. They followed the curve of the arm south, past houses that grew larger and quieter and further apart, past bare trees that leaned over the road like old men conferring, past stone walls softened by moss and hedges that would be green again in the spring. Sadie watched the street lights give way to porch lights, and the porch lights give way to long stretches of dark road, where the only light was the reflection of the headlights on the wet pavement. She did not speak. Leonard did not push her. Constance drove with the steady, patient patience of a woman who had made this drive 10,000 times and still paid attention to every turn. The house, when they reached it, was not the kind of house Sadie had imagined. It was long and low, built of gray stone with a steep slate roof and warm light coming from the windows on the ground floor. There was a wreath on the front door made of dried cranberries and cedar boughs, and the garden, even in December, had the shape of a place that someone had loved carefully. Constance was out of the car first. She opened Sadie's door and said simply, "Welcome, Sadie. Your room is ready. Are you tired?" And Sadie, who had not realized until that moment how tired she was, how deeply and completely the exhaustion of 11 days on the street had settled into her small body, nodded. That was the beginning. The story did not end that night because real stories rarely do. It went on through the winter and into the spring. Leonard's former law partners, quietly and without fanfare, helped navigate the legal situation with Sadie's mother. They arranged proper representation. They ensured Sadie was placed in Leonard's legal care while her mother received the help she needed, and they did it in a way that kept Sadie's name out of every file that did not absolutely require it. Sadie went back to school, a different school, one within walking distance of the stone house on the arm, where the teachers were patient and the library was large, and no one asked her questions she was not ready to answer. She kept the small white card in the inside pocket of a new coat that fit her properly, and she kept the wooden horse in the same pocket, and she kept the composition notebook, which she filled slowly over the months that followed, with small, careful drawings of the harbor and the garden and the view from the window of the room with the door that locked from the inside. The story of how they met did not appear on the news. There were no security cameras on the steps of the post office that morning, and no one in the city of Halifax had any idea that one of the most accomplished lawyers in Canadian history had nearly fallen on the ice and been steadied by a 9-year-old girl with duct tape on her boots. The story stayed where it began, between the two of them, the way the most important stories often do. Leonard did not speak of it. Sadie did not tell anyone at school. Only Constance and Hattie knew, and they were the kind of people who knew how to hold a thing that was not theirs to share. Years passed. Leonard lived longer than his doctors had expected, in the way that certain quiet, stubborn men do when they have found a reason to stay. He saw Sadie graduate from high school. He saw her accepted to Dalhousie on a scholarship that he had arranged without letting her know it had been arranged. He did not see her graduate from law school, because he died on a Tuesday morning in the stone house on the arm, with Constance holding one hand, and Sadie holding the other, and the winter light coming through the kitchen window the way his wife had always loved. In Leonard's will, there was a letter for Sadie. It was short. It said, I want you to remember 3 things. The first is that your father picked your name and it suits you. The second is that you caught me when I was falling and did not ask for anything in return. The third is that the world does not get better on its own. It gets better when someone decides to be the good part of it. You, Sadie Faulkner, were the good part of mine. Sadie is 37 years old now. She practices law in Halifax in a small firm that takes cases most firms will not touch, for people who cannot afford the firms that would. On the wall behind her desk is a framed business card, plain white, with a name and a phone number and nothing else. On the shelf beside it is a small wooden horse carved from driftwood, and on the ground floor of a building she purchased last year on Gottingen Street, there is a warm room with 10 beds and a kitchen that smells of bread, and a door that locks from the inside. She named it Edith House, after a woman on Prince Edward Island she never met. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment telling me what part you'll remember and subscribe for more stories of quiet kindness and second chances. Thank you for being here.